Hello, EnderSword here again with a replay, this time from the Silver League. This was submitted by Stil. He posted this on the TeamLiquid.net strategy forums, just looking for advice on what to do in this matchup. So we'll be going over this game together here. His opponent is the Terran player Mathar, up here in the top left-hand corner. The three things that I'm going to focus on most in this game are, number one, just general awareness of what's going on, how you can imply what your opponent might be doing by the things that you see in Scout, and how to appropriately respond to those things. The second thing that I'm going to look at is kind of an ongoing theme with me, the difference between being passive and being defensive. When you're being defensive, you're actually teching or going towards something, some sort of attack in the future. When you're being passive, you're just sitting and defending, and there's no actual plan to threaten at any point in the near future. The third thing that we're going to look at is a bit micro-focused, which is positioning of your army on an engagement. It's important to get the right initial position on an attack. That's often more important than any microing that you do during the attack, and that's where there's a bit of failure in this game, and the outcome was impacted. Early on here we see that the Nexus goes silent at the 2-minute mark and picks up again at 2:07. Seemingly small point, but you do want to continuously be making those probes and not have gaps in production there. You can see chrono boosts after to try and kind of catch up. He was probably going to do that anyway, but those little gaps, one, can negate the chrono boost that you're doing, so negate the advantage that you actually have with that mechanic, but also they can add up over the course of the game and really add into a big difference in what you're able to produce later on. Here we got the standard things going down. We got an assimilator, got a gateway, and cybernetic spore going down, 2 pylons. All right, he's out here scouting on the map. Good stuff so far. Generally pretty good. I did point that one out, but he's generally pretty good with getting these probes out, starting them pretty much right on time. You can tell that that is where his attention is focused. He does actually have that selected here. He's opting not to go for the first zealot here, instead skipping that and straight into a stalker. The probe did poke up here and gets picked off by the Marine. It's good to be focusing on your worker as it's scouting and going into an enemy base. When you know it's hitting a point that you could be encountering the enemy, try and make sure that your attention is at least momentarily there, so that you can make a decision. Do I retreat? Do I have to run towards something to see something? Do I have to get out of there so that I can look again later? Something like that. Here he came up this area and was being fired at by a Marine, so that by the time he realized and poked up the ramp and tried to get out, he died. So try and be aware of that. Be aware of the position on the mini-map, so that when you're approaching an area, you just turn your attention there for a moment and see what's going on and make the decision you have to make. He does, as I said, go for the first stalker, did pick off the scouting SCV, which is good. But he's opting for sentry again, going for a gateway, chrono boosting out that cyber core. We saw barracks, 2 barracks here. The bunker wasn't there at the time. This can be an indication of a lot of early Terran pressure. They do 2 barracks or 3 barracks pressures against you. So you do often want to have that zealot out so that you can actually use it and help hold off that pressure. I know a lot of people don't like using the zealots at low level for some reason, and I'll discuss that more in a little bit when we have our first big engagement. But you can see here another common problem that happens. He's been chronoing out this warp gate research, and the warp gates are done, and this gateway is done, and it's production time. But we're now supply block. That's something that really needs to be avoided. You know, this is a predictable time. Like, you should be kind of keeping an eye on when your warp gate's done, and people are often really trying to hurry it along. They're chrono boosting it out to make sure that that production can start right away, especially knowing that the Terran could actually be potentially quite aggressive with the build they were doing. He, of course, doesn't know about this tech yet. Given that potential, you want to make sure you're not missing rounds of production. So you want to get those pylons built and not be supply blocking yourself at those crucial times when everything starts to line up together. He goes for the first observer out here. These warp gates are not being used at the moment. They're just kind of waiting. Again, it's not a lack of money that's holding it on, but and in this case it wasn't even the supply blocking that was holding it up, but just lack of attention, not really producing out of them. The Nexus has been slipping on making some probes, but at this point in the game he's actually a fair bit ahead. The Terran has been slipping a little more. Of course they can afford to, given that they have mules. Always consider basically their worker count to be about 4 above whatever it is, just because for each orbital command that they have there. The composition of this army is a little odd. Again, we do want zealots in there. In terms of awareness of what's going on, the observer looked here, saw a starport was here with a reactor, came in and saw a factory with the tech lab still building, and saw that there's no army up front, but 2 gases mining. Where could it possibly be? And that's the obvious answer, is if you see that, you see an army missing, you see a starport down with the reactor, you see that he's got the gas, even see that the starport isn't building anything. It's got to be going somewhere. And your first instinct, given that it's Terran, should be, well, he's probably dropping me. He couldn't build tanks because the tech lab wasn't done. He wouldn't have used that much gas with Marauders. And it's unlikely that he made Vikings or something. So what could it be? And this is the general answer for what it probably was. So you can often preemptively try and move over here to drop that, or to make sure that you're trying to stop that drop. Ultimately, he did a really good job here. He got the probes away, didn't lose a single probe in that, which is great, and did look like he cleaned that up very well. But if we look at the resources lost tab, because these are very expensive units, and he cleaned up very inexpensive, very efficient units, he ended up taking the same amount of damage, even though the actual number of units killed was vastly different. And he didn't end up getting the medevacs in that. So the addition of zealots to your army can actually tank a lot of the initial damage, can cause tons of damage to a Terran force, and even though a lot of people, I think, feel like they get kited and they're not really getting full use out of them, the whole idea is for them to kite and tank for the rest of your army, because these units are just notoriously not cost efficient. The Stalker is probably the worst cost efficient unit in the entire game. It costs so much for how little damage it actually does and how durable it is. So you need those zealots in front of it to make sure that you're not just losing these first. And the sentries, it really matters what energy is built up, and you just can't be losing those. They just cost too much, and they die too quickly if you don't have zealots in front of them. Now here we have an observer. The observer just saw that everything was picked up by these medevacs. He saw the medevacs start to move out towards the base, but then pull back because they saw the observer there. They saw the little feint as they started to move. He sees a missile turret going down, which is very likely designed solely to pick off the observer. And when this gets picked off, you have to then ask yourself, okay, I just lost vision. I wonder what's going to happen. And you just have to assume, have kind of the game sense to know that that drop is clearly just now coming towards my base. So he does, in fact, initially make the correct decision of moving over here so that he can intercept this drop. Now, he really should be kind of more in potentially this area, as opposed to up here, since you want to protect your min-order line itself and hopefully get them as they're dropping in. But they do come down, and sneak their way in and see the angle that they're coming. Basically comes from the exact same angle he was before. Why would he deviate from it if it kind of worked? And drops through here. Unfortunately, the building placement that Protoss has put in blocks his own army horribly. Just absolutely keeps tons of these stalkers behind. They're not firing on anything. At this point, none of these has taken a shot at the enemy army, and he's just not efficiently getting anything out of these. There's also no zealots in the front, so nothing is forcing the Marines to move. They can just stand there and fire. He does eventually move command in and gets them stutter-stepped around, and by the time this is all cleaned up, he's lost so many probes, lost so much of that expensive army, we're now 3,000 behind in resources. That's basically, at this point, in the completely unrecoverable stage of the game, and you want to avoid that, obviously. But it could have been fixed by move commanding in, getting a good kind of surround or close position on that army. You try and get right up to it, right under it, so that you can both pick off the medevacs before they get away. They get completely away scot-free, didn't take really any damage, and that you can actually get everything in firing range so that you're not just attacking it single file like Xerxes' army or something like that. You're just going to get picked apart, and it's not a position you want to be in. Small point I probably could have talked about earlier is this Immortal's been stuck in here the entire game. He costs 250 minerals and 100 gas. This warp gate costs 150 minerals. Kill it. As soon as that gets stuck in there, kill it. It's not worth trapping that in there. It's too expensive to be stuck. If a zealot was in there, and I know everybody's done this at least once, look at the unit, look at its cost. Is it cheaper to leave it in there, or is it cheaper to get it out? In this case, it's cheaper to break that thing down and get that out. If you wanted to be clever about it, get a warp prism, pick it up out, drop it out, and go harass your opponent. We see at this point he's finally getting range on the Colossus that he doesn't have and has no real intention of getting at this point. He could afford to get one if he wasn't actually upgrading the range in terms of gas, but this drop comes down, and that's pretty much game. At this point, it's just been picking away at him so much that he now doesn't have the army to deal with this, whether he was in a good position or not. So overall in this game, it was the awareness and reactions. He could have known what was happening at each point in the game. He should have known that drops were actually coming. He could have verified that drops really were happening by taking key points in the map and getting vision there. A pylon here, a pylon here, owning this watchtower, placing an observer in front of the ramp as opposed to on the army. That sort of thing can give you awareness of what's actually going on, and awareness of tech and things that you see can tell you what's going to happen. 3 medevacs full of units are probably going to drop you. So when you move into that position, don't move back because you fear a ground assault up front. Do the safe thing, be over here, and then scout for a ground attack out here. The second thing, obviously, was passivity. At no point did he ever attempt to threaten the Terran army. He felt penned up in his base, but he wasn't teching towards anything. There was no future threat coming. That's the difference between passive and defensive. And the third thing, obviously, was positioning. Get your army into position and fight. Do not fight through chokes. Don't let your army sit in the back. Do not attack single file. That's what made the real difference in this game. Hope that